Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roxanne Marcel Shaw. On behalf of the Professional Standards Councils, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the first Professional Standards Forum of 2023. Our panel for today's forum features 4 experienced and eminent speakers on professional standards, who have all been involved in conducting or responding to reviews with a focus on ensuring professional standards, regulatory arrangements are fit for purpose in evolving environments. Our first speaker is Ron Paterson, Emeritus Professor of Law at the University of Auckland and Senior Fellow at the Melbourne Law School.
Thank you, Roxanne, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to talk to you about a subject dear to my heart. Fit for purpose regulation, lessons from reviews. And on the side of the screen there is the cover from the final report that I recently delivered to the New Zealand Law Society after a year-long independent review. So I thought I'd just start with some broader thoughts on the context. I've tried to understand a little of the work of the Professional Standards Councils, and it seems to me that there are some common themes in various reviews of professions that I and others have been involved in, and the work of the councils. The first of those themes is the emphasis on prioritising the interests of consumers, which we refer to as the public interest, over the interests of the members of the regulated profession, important though those interests are, stating very clearly that the purpose of regulation of a profession is to put the public interest first. And in doing that, we also seek always, and we think of this as sort of light touch or right touch regulation, to do so, to regulate in a way that promotes the professionalism of the members of that profession. What we don't want is heavy-handed regulation that actually undermines professionalism. And Roxanne referred to my work as the New Zealand Health and Disability Commissioner, somewhat akin to the Healthcare Complaints Commission in New South Wales or the Health Ombudsman in Queensland. And I always conceived of the role there as holding up a mirror for the profession and the members of the profession to consider, did they think in this particular case they'd met the high standards they set for themselves? And obviously in referring to standards, we're always looking, and I know this is a mission of the Professional Standards Councils, to improve those standards. Maintenance of public confidence in a profession is also truly an important and separate aspect of the public interest. And complaints are a topic dear to my heart, in addition to the years as Parliamentary Ombudsman, which in New Zealand is sort of complaints central for the country and is also the combined role of Freedom of Information Commissioner. I had the privilege of chairing our Banking Ombudsman scheme, which is a private dispute resolution scheme, but with an independent chair. Through these different complaint schemes, we look to ensure appropriate accountability of members of a profession, and we want a scheme that is in a system that will be seen by members of the public, by consumers, as being independent, fair. It needs to be fair for them, but of course fair for the person complained about, accessible, efficient, which includes of course timeliness, and effective in terms of the remedies that it comes up with. So was the framework fit for purpose? Our current legislation dated from 2006. It didn't set out any regulatory objectives. It's hard to know what the purpose of your regulation is if you don't spell out clearly what the regulator is supposed to be doing. No treaty reference, more about title protection than risk to consumers, restrictive in terms of the sort of models you could have. Alternative business structures were not possible. And it very much focused on the regulation of individuals and had a very prescriptive model for handling complaints. The photograph there was from a public meeting in the Hut, which is just north of Wellington, in the early 1990s. Members of the public, clients of the law firm Renshaw Edwards, who had been defrauded. It turned out the two partners were both crooks, and neither knew the other was, and to the tune of millions of dollars. And every member of the profession was levied for, I think, $10,000 to cover the payments that needed to be made. So that had actually been part of the impetus for the 2006 Act, which said that it was introducing a more responsive regulatory framework. But as I've said, times change, and it's proving not to be responsive enough. So what did we recommend in our recent report? So our key recommendation is for a new independent regulator akin to the Legal Services Commission and Board in Victoria, or to the model that they've adopted in Ireland. We don't believe it's realistic in 2023 to say that for the legal profession, compared with just about every other profession in New Zealand, save for the teachers, to continue to be, by statute, both the regulator and to have the specific function of still being the representative body to speak out on behalf of lawyers. As a result, its effectiveness and efficiency as a regulator was being compromised, but also lawyers have found that it's not able to stand up for their interests in the way that they would wish. We noted the trend internationally for independent regulation. Our cost-benefit analysis suggested that this would, if anything, be over time less expensive than the current model. And we've opted, instead of the current model of a board of 5 through elections and a representative council of another 25, which is just everybody who served on that body has described as unwieldy. Modern governance would suggest a smaller board. We've said 8, skills and competence based, with, in our view, we think there should be 4 members from the profession and 4 public members not from the profession. Importantly, with a careful nominations process insulated from government, obviously for the legal profession, the role of upholding the rule of law is important, and so you need to protect the independence. And we do, of course, envisage continuing an important role for the Law Society as the national representative body, placing consumers at the heart of the regulatory framework. The 2006, the current legislation in New Zealand, thought that it had done that and was described at the time as a massive leap forward for consumerism. Well, consumers' needs and consumers' expectations change, and we think that the framework in New Zealand needs to go further in emphasising clients' rights to good quality care and information, including about fees. What's happened in our country is there's a sort of a standard practice of a formulaic, these are our terms, and yes, they will tell you the basis on which fees are charged, but you've got no realistic idea of the extent to which the clock's ticking and what the fees have built up to date. Where is the work up to at this point? What's the end goal that we're seeking to achieve as lawyer and client? Much stronger emphasis on competence, assurance, and the regulation of lawyers, something that's in our country has been increasingly emphasised in relation to health practitioners, and that was the subject of the book that I wrote, but still not as evident in some other professions, including the law. Give the regulator powers not just to discipline, but to intervene earlier. Maybe there's a mental health or an addiction issue, failing cognition. Try and support the practitioner back to safe practice, including by imposing conditions on the practice. And we've suggested that the current way of doing continuous professional development, CPD, is a bit of a blunt instrument. It has become a bit of a tick box exercise. We've looked to reviews of this internationally and suggested that it's time for that to be refreshed. Our report is now with the New Zealand Law Society Board, which has said publicly it will report to the Minister of Justice by the end of July and take soundings from the profession, and that's happening right now. And as you would expect from some elements in the profession, there's quite a bit of pushback from some quarters, but it's early days. But ultimately, a reform of this nature, like your uniform law, is going to take legislative will, or political will, really. So there a Minister of Justice who is willing to push this up the agenda. So time will tell, and we have an election coming up in October. So the final slide is I leave you with an image. It's actually an image from our garden. at Kawakawa Bay, southeast of Auckland, and I kind of like the notion of partnership between the provider, the professional, and the consumer. And I've left my contact details there.
For now, we will go to our second speaker on the panel, Peter Gow, who was appointed the inaugural Western Australian Building Commissioner in 2011. Peter, we are fortunate to also have you chair the Project Control Group for the Constructing Building Integrity Research Project, in which the councils are a lead research partner.
Thank you, Roxanne. I come to you from Noongar Whadjuk country in Perth, so I'm still able to say good morning to some people at least. The main review into the building industry in the last decade or so is the Building Confidence Report that was commissioned by the Building Ministers Forum in 2018 and done by Peter Shergold and Bronwyn Weir. It was done in the wake of fires at La Crosse in Melbourne and then the Grenfell disaster in London. And it's really been something of a process review, looking at process failures rather than structural reform in the industry. It's got a lot of good recommendations which are process related that I won't go into, but for professional associations, the key one is that it argues that there should be registration of the key professions and trades and restriction of work in the building industry to those registered people. If we look around the country, there are jurisdictions such as Queensland, which already largely do this. So pretty much everybody under the sun in Queensland is registered. On the other side of the country in Western Australia, it's traditionally been very lightly regulated. So there is a strong recommendation that comes out of Building Confidence that you really need to make sure you've got competent people doing the work, and you do that by registering them and restricting work to them. And finally, we have the Constructing Building Integrity Research Project. This is a research project that's come out of, if you like, the research infrastructure in the country rather than government regulators or industry. But at the Sustainable Built Environment National Research Centre, which sets it up, is a combination of government, industry and academic stakeholders. So it's a reasonably broad-based group. The intention of this is to generate new knowledge about how these things work that we can build on the existing reviews, as to recommend improvements and increase awareness by professions and trades and regulators of the role that they play. So it's very focused on the subject of this seminar. It's very appropriate that the professional standards councils are part of that process. So it's looking at how do you identify what are the professional standards that we are using at the moment, how is professionalism being applied in the emerging professions that are now recognised as being in the building industry, and how do you develop building integrity systems? The main themes that come out of these, one has been a focus on construction rather than operation and maintenance, and I think that has been a limit to the formal reviews. As I mentioned, we need the broader view that we're now getting out of the current reviews. The second one is registration as a quality control measure. There is this sense that if you register people, you'll get better quality, that registered people can be trusted, will deliver good consumer outcomes, etc. There is a lot of truth to that, but it is a particular tool that does a particular job. And it works well to guard the gates. There's a focus with registration on initial competence and prosecuting people who aren't registered rather than policing the patch of the people who are. And in any quality control process, you need production, sampling and testing. And if you're going to have registration, you need the registration authorities to be out there looking at what's going on and looking at the current practice, the current competency of the practitioners, not just the initial qualifications to get registered. So registration, in my view, can work as a quality control measure, but it has to be a holistic approach. Traditional registration has tended to be on get in, get the tick, now you've got your ticket, we're not all that interested in you after that. Regulators have to regulate, and that's very much the view that came out of the Queensland Building Construction Review. There is an expectation that there will be a strong cop on the beat, seen to be doing things. People, governments, consumers want to know that there is someone they can go to, and when they go to that person, they get some effective response. Now, one of the things that can help that is co-regulation, where you try to draw on the strengths of the statutory regulators and the industry bodies. That has worked for 20 years in engineering in Queensland fairly well. And what you can do is you can give the statutory regulator real teeth, real investigatory powers, ability to bang down the door, take evidence, compel people to talk and so on, coupled with the technical expertise and the understanding of the system and the nuancing that might come out of engaging people from a professional association to work with this. And it works both in the initial registration process. If you've gone through an assessment already to become a member of your association, there is probably no need to do that again just to prove the same thing in order to get registered. But it also applies in disciplinary matters where the regulator can use their powers, but they can also draw on the expertise from the professional association. And the other thing you get through co-regulation, which is particularly a thing in Australia, is that occupational registration is a state and territory based thing. And it's damn hard to get national consistency or national coordination, whereas the industry associations, by and large, are national associations with a national set of standards and a national approach to things. So by the state and territory regulators working with the national associations, we can get much better national uniformity over things like standards and responses and so on. It's not perfect, but it's better than having no national view at all. Conflicts of interest are real and they exist throughout the whole process. There is inherently a conflict of interest if you're selling something to someone. You want to sell it for the highest price for the minimum cost of input. On the other hand, you want to make your customer happy so that they come back. So that this trading quality control conflict of interest is inherent in a lot of the things that we do. But it becomes particularly an issue when you've got members and you're trying to represent your members, but you're also trying to represent the public interest. And professions traditionally have said the public interest must come first. So when we look at the role of professional associations, there is a fundamental question, what sort of association are you? Are you the old professional trade guild? Are you a member advocacy group? More particularly, and this becomes more and more relevant, are you an organisation of individuals as members, or are you an organisation that represents businesses, which may well be companies, firms, yes, sole traders? This is often mixed up in regulation, particularly in the building sector, where builders, for example, are typically businesses, architects are registered as individuals. So you really need to know what you are. Are you a standard setter or not? As I said before, do you set professional standards, or are you more of a business advocacy group? It's important to know what you do. What's your membership profile? Is it national? Is it local? Is it businesses? Is it individuals? You really need to understand what type of association you are, because some are better suited for a regulatory role than others. If you do set professional standards, are they linked to international standards? Do you just think you're setting national standards? Are you working locally, just in a particular state and territory, or just within your little member group? There is a role for all of these, but particularly if you're trying to align with international standards, you don't have complete freedom to work with local regulators. And when governments come in and start to say we're going to set up a registration scheme, they may want to set standards that are different from what you've got. Do you have a building integrity system? Do you back this up with codes of practice, training, disciplinary processes, complaints processes, and so on? And how do you deal with edge cases? There's going to be a lot of people who nearly qualify but don't quite, but have been doing perfectly satisfactory work for a long time. When you bring in mandatory registration and limit work to registered people, that is a real issue that needs to be looked at. If you're assessing competence, how do you do it? Is it mandatory for your members to be assessed for their competence, or is it a voluntary thing that you offer as an add-on? Do you do it through tick box processes? Do you have exams? Do you do professional interviews? There are a lot of different ways of assessing competence, some of which are a lot more rigorous than others. And do you have the tools necessary to assess the sort of competence that you need for membership in your association? Do you police standards? Is it your job to be out there as the policeman, making sure people are performing properly and taking action against people who aren't? Or isn't that your job as an association? Professional associations working in a co-regulatory model with a government agency, who's policing the standards? Is it the regulator or is it the agency? Is it both? You've got to work out a way of working together. So that's quite important. Do you actually take disciplinary action, and is it meaningful? Just telling someone that they can't be a member of your club anymore may not be meaningful, but if you can get out, name names, etc., really have an effect, that's a much more important role for a professional association. And finally, at the conflict of interest level, whose side are you on in a fight? Are you on your members' side? Are you there to advocate for your individual members? Or are you there to advocate for the public interest, the regulatory system, etc.? And co-regulation can put you in a bind as to who your constituency is and whose side are you really on. And finally, are you giving members what they pay for? An association has to provide value for money, basically. And if you're not giving members the support in terms of their professional development, looking after their interests, keeping the riffraff out, etc., they may not support your organisation. And this is particularly an issue, again, when government comes in with statutory regulation. You know, if you have to get registered by the state, what's the point of joining your organisation? So there's some real questions there that come out of these reviews, and I'll be interested to hear what the other speakers have to say and the discussion on these, because many of these themes are very similar to what Ron encountered in New Zealand.
We'll kick off again and go to our third speaker, who is Michael O'Neill. Michael commenced the role of Chief Executive Officer with the Tax Practitioners Board in August 2018. He is a taxation lawyer with extensive public service experience. Michael joined the Tax Practitioners Board from the Australian Taxation Office, where he was Chief Risk Officer, following senior leadership positions in investigations, advice, litigation, and in private practice.
I see three parts to the TPP's purpose. The first is around supporting and improving public and consumer protections. The second is around enhancing professional and ethical behaviour of tax advisors. And the third around community confidence in the system. I've just numbered them 1, 2, and 3 for simplicity's sake, because they're all important and they're equally reinforcing in any good regulatory system. I think it's important to just pause a moment for those three elements, because while they speak to our statutory purpose at the TPP, they probably are equally applicable. You might be a professional service provider. You might be, as a member of a firm, the leader of a firm, you might be driving a professional association that's looking at that co-regulatory role or standard setting. You might be in the regulatory business, like the councils, the TPP, ASIC or APRA. It seems to me that there's elements of those three purpose statements that speak equally to each of us. There's been some recent publicity about the Tax Practitioners Board, a particular case involving a tax partner and an accounting firm. Today, I don't propose to cover any of the facts of those matters. They've been reported on our public register, and some of those issues have been subject to some parliamentary scrutiny here in Australia. But I'd like to say that in that case, and in some cases, we have the opportunity of understanding what are the underlying issues. And some of the underlying issues that can be extrapolated and develop lessons about professional behaviour more generally. So how do our particular compliance focuses, investigations, court cases, disciplinary decisions, draw out more fundamental values around integrity, confidentiality, management of conflicts of interest, those more universal themes? And on the back of that case, I'm very gratified to see that many professional associations in our sphere, many firms, many practitioners, professional service providers are, in Ron's words, holding the mirror to their own services and saying, what can we improve? Risk assessment guides our strategies as they do yours, and there's always a need for appropriate measures. How we are reporting internally and how are we transparent as a public regulator to the government, the parliament and the public more generally. One benefit we had was an independent review ordered by the government in 2019 and conducted by Keith James. Keith is a senior experienced lawyer and accountant. That independent review has been a power of good. There were broad terms of reference testing both our organisation, the TPP, and our regulatory system. Our system of law is one that's both ancient and recent. The regulation of the tax profession has been a feature of the Australian tax system for about 80 years, but a national regulator for tax practitioners was floated as a notion about 20 years ago, and the TPB has only been in effect for 13 years. So Keith's terms of reference said, is our regime fit for purpose? The process of review was very inclusive. He sought written submissions in the first instance, had a range of town hall meetings to hear multiple views. He issued an interim report or a discussion paper to refine those views and possible recommendations before landing on those 28 recommendations in the slide. The majority of those recommendations were supported by the last government in full or in part, and some of those have administrative implementation and others are matters for law reform. Obviously, consultation is a key aspect of the next stage. Some of those law reform matters are currently before the Parliament. There's a bill looking at 5 of those measures, and one of those measures is around clarifying the purpose and intent of the TPB. Another one is ensuring that the TPB is operating with greater independence, recognising the separate but complementary roles of both the tax office as the administrator of the tax system and the TPB. Can I conclude then by just returning to our starting point? Those purposes around consumers, ensuring professional standards and community confidence in the system. We might talk about the regulatory framework for tax practitioners, the tax system, the super system. Might look at healthcare complaints, the building industry, the standards of your particular industry. I think those 3 purpose statements are a great reason for us in the TPB to focus on our work. And I dare say, whether you're a professional out there in services land, whether you're driving an association, you're an educator that continues to challenge and inspire our growth, or you're a co-regulator like ourselves, those purpose statements might be meaningful for you.
I'm going to call on Tina Lisa Sexton, who is a chartered accountant with a background in risk and financial management, governance and ethics. She has worked in the private, public, academic and not-for-profit sectors and was the National Professional Standards Advisor in Ethics and Corporate Governance at CPA Australia for 14 years until 2011. Tina is the Tasmanian nominated member of the Professional Standards Councils, and I'd like to invite you now, Tina, to reflect on the opportunities for associations to build fit-for-purpose regulatory systems and foster continuous improvement in professional standards. Thank you.
On behalf of the Professional Standards Councils and our online forum participants, thank you so much, Ron, Peter and Michael. The Council selected fit-for-purpose regulation lessons from reviews as the topic for this forum because the professional standards regulatory environment is ever-changing. To remain effective and responsive, it is vital that the life cycle of professional standards schemes include opportunities to assess the conditions in which they operate and take opportunities to improve their design and performance. Each of your informative and thought-provoking presentations has given us insights that we can use to help our continuous improvement efforts. How can we ensure that regulation remains fit for purpose in a changing environment? How can associations ensure that their standards and systems keep pace with community expectations? This is in large part derived from the results of research and reviews. Reviews of or by associations are important continuous improvement tools. From the perspective of the professional standards regime, regulatory reviews are intended to improve the quality of regulation through a robust, transparent and evidence-based process to identify how operational and quality problems are most effectively addressed, all the while serving the public interest and assuring consumer protection. In the context of the work of the councils, this is achieved by the Annual Professional Standards Report, or APSR, which encompasses statutory and policy reporting requirements of occupational associations with approved schemes. As a meta regulator, we look at what measures an association is taking to ensure consumers of the member services are protected from harms. We look at governance and compliance systems and identify improvements in risk management and complaints and discipline systems. We provide feedback to an association to assist with effective self-regulation. Associations' annual compliance reports to councils focus very strongly on improvements in consumer-focused risk management processes. This is a statutory reporting obligation. We ask associations to provide professional indemnity claims data, to look at the underlying causes of claims, to provide details of consumer complaints trends, and to demonstrate how these data are used to inform continuous professional development programs. Under this model, meeting consumer and community expectations is essential to member service provision rather than conflicting with it. We monitor the ongoing performance of associations' professional regulatory systems and the regulatory environment in which they operate. Formal feedback from associations' annual reporting provides an opportunity for councils to comment on whether systems remain responsive and fit for purpose and offer suggestions for improvement. We would argue that a meta-regulator with oversight of professional associations' self-regulation is an effective mechanism to ensure that associations improve their professional standards and respond proactively to consumer expectations. The Professional Standards Council and other regulators, including, of course, self-regulatory professions, are very much part of a community. Accordingly, it is of vital importance to see the points of commonality across our regulatory roles. A good example of this is the Memorandum of Understanding that the Professional Standards Council has with the Tax Practitioners Board. Being supportive of one another and sharing our learnings, the regulatory ecosystem will improve. Supporting the bodies we regulate and operating from an understanding that most professionals will strive to act professionally, but may occasionally need advice and direction to do so, will further improve the regulatory system.
That brings us to the close of the forum for this afternoon. Our next forum will be in person in October this year with a focus on practical tools to support the operation of professional standards schemes. I hope we will see many of you in Sydney for that event. For now, thank you and good afternoon.